Hi, everyone. This is Talkback. It's Tuesday, October 20th. Guess what? It's 2 weeks from Election Day. Wow, we're almost there. And I've been letting you listen to so many different voices, people that are running and our leaders are trying to help us through this pandemic, through this election season, through everything that's happening in our country this unusual, tumultuous year. And today I have the pleasure of talking to someone who's running for office for the 34th State Representative District in Connecticut. He wants to be a state representative, and his name is Judd Melon. Hi, Judd. It's good to see you.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you for having me.
Okay, it's great. First of all, before we get some of your background, let's just identify the parameters of where you're running. So tell us, in the State House of Representatives, where is the 34th District? What towns does it comprise?
Yeah, so the 34th District State House seat comprises the entirety of East Haddam and East Hampton, as well as a portion of Colchester known as Westchester.
Okay, those areas. And where do you live now, Judd?
So I live in East Haddam.
Okay, so tell us, is this the first time you're running for office?
It's the first time running for partisan office. I ran for elected positions in my union or on my homeowners association board before, but this is definitely a different experience.
Okay, but you've been active in political issues, whether they be, as you said, in union, in labor issues, in home ownership and things like that. So that's great. We'll get through some of your experiences. So tell us, give us a little bit about your background, where you were born, where you went to school, and how you came to be running now. Yeah,
so I was born and raised in Massachusetts. Like Concord area, for those people familiar with Massachusetts. And went to college in Vermont, got my degree in Spanish and French, literature and language. And then I went on to get my master's at Boston College, and then I ended up getting my PhD out in Indiana at Purdue University.
What did you get your PhD in?
Spanish literature.
Okay, and did you teach for a while?
I did. So I taught my way through graduate school. It's certainly a lot more affordable that way. So I taught at Purdue for 4 years and Boston College for a couple of years, teaching instructor. And then I taught 5 years at public high schools in Massachusetts after I finished my degree.
Okay. And so tell us, what did you teach, and then how did you transition to another career after teaching?
Yeah, so I taught Spanish at all different levels, everything from introductory Spanish to literature. I taught a survey course. And in terms of transitioning, well, it's been pretty recent. We moved to Connecticut because of my spouse. She got a great opportunity here. And so I took a little pause from teaching for the first time since I was 19. At 19, I started teaching summer school Spanish. Even so, this is the first time I've really had a window where I've had an opportunity to really commit a lot of time. I was working, I was volunteering on a presidential campaign before I started my own campaign, and I've always been involved in politics and sort of activism. So, arriving here in the sense of running for office was really just a function of talking to other Democrats that are engaged in this area, and I asked if they had any candidates in mind, and they didn't. And I said, I think that we always have to make an affirmative case for why, our policies and our priorities are important. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, so when you were teaching, your activism showed up in the labor union, the teachers union, is that it? And what kinds of things were you advocating for?
Yeah, so it was interesting. That was my first time as part of a union teaching in a public high school, and it really connected me with a lot of people in different groups. I worked on ballot initiatives to increase the minimum wage, to create paid family medical leave. This is all when I was teaching in Massachusetts, to reduce the workload on nurses. And I also did some volunteering doing translation work for one of the gubernatorial candidates there. So yeah, I think really just my union was really just a wake-up call to sort of the activism that workers need, and sort of a good reason to get involved, and so I've stuck with it.
Yeah, and some of those issues that you dealt with in the union are certainly mirrored here in Connecticut, whether it be family leave or minimum wage. These are certainly things that are very relevant here in Connecticut too. So coming to Connecticut and having a background in some advocacy as you did, and obviously being interested in politics, you must have had there must have been an aha moment where you said, you know what, I've got to run for office now. Was it something about this unusual year, this unusual presidency that we have that we're dealing with? What was the straw that finally made it for you to say, you know what, I'm going to run for office?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say there was one big aha moment. I think, we're all cognizant of the fact that these are not normal times, not politically, not from a healthcare standpoint, not economically. But this is definitely the first year that I worked on a presidential campaign. I thought it was important enough to volunteer because I really felt like, a lot of rights have been sacrificed over the past 3.5 years plus. So that was a big thing for me in terms of just, this is a time to put up or shut up, I guess. And I never really saw myself running for House of Representatives, but I think that there are real issues that we can be leaders on, and that's why I'm here.
Okay. And of course, you're not running in a vacuum. There's an opponent, an incumbent who's running that you're running against, and they have produced a record, and we're going to talk about that, how obviously you're going to turn that around. You're not going to vote the way that your opponent did, and you're going to identify as a Democrat. So I want to talk about that, because my feeling this year is that everyone down ballot, like you and Senator Needleman and Congressman Courtney, have to identify with the entire Democratic ticket, and we have to hold the Republican opponents accountable for their ticket, including at the top. We can't let them get away with saying, well, I'm voting on my own. I have my own priorities, and I'm not paying attention to what's going on at the top. We cannot let them get away with it. So I want you to tell me, why are you a Democrat? What are the Democratic principles or things that are important to you? And of course, you're also endorsed on the Working Families line, which is another party, and you have their endorsement too. So on the ballot, you're there twice, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So tell us, what are the Democratic principles? Why are you a Democrat, and why is it so important for us to clear the board all blue this year more than others?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm speaking honestly, I've lived in 5 states. Because of grad school, I bounced around a lot. And so being a Democrat means different things in different places. When I was in Indiana, I'd read up on each candidate to make sure that they're the same kind of Democrat I am. And I think that in Connecticut, we have the benefit that, a lot of us have a commitment to the same issues in a very clear way, especially in contrast to the president's party, as we might call it, because it's not what it used to be. I think the whole ticket's more important than ever to vote up and down the ballot for Democrats. I'm a Democrat because fundamentally, I think, one thing that most Democrats can agree on is that, the system's not fair. And I think if you give people a fair shot to succeed economically, to access healthcare, to raise a family, everybody socially has benefited from that. That's why I'm a Democrat. I think that we acknowledge that there is some real unfairness in the system, and that we have to address that in a way that's urgent and that doesn't leave anybody behind.
Okay, and we'll go through some of the specific issues that you have as to what needs to be done from your point of view. So I noticed from your literature, and we'll go through these, that in terms of this election, your top hot button issues are healthcare, economic opportunity, and improving how government institutions serve the people. So let's start with healthcare. you know that we're going to have a Supreme Court look at the whole issue of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, on November 10th. And we know that the Republican Party wants to completely repeal it, and that would take away all of the benefits for the people that get that insurance, as well as everyone else in the country. People don't realize that the rights in the Obamacare legislation also helped everyone else in terms of no lifetime caps, no pre-existing conditions problems, and so forth. So what is your headline on the healthcare that needs to be done in Connecticut?
Yeah, I mean, I really think there are two headlines. The first one is we're in an ongoing pandemic. We have never seen in a more clear way that there is a connection between each individual's health and the health of the community, right? So there's a real urgent need to have to address that. And I think that the state, especially comparatively with other states, has done a really great job trying to address that. In terms of, the larger picture of the US, we can't forget that, if the ACA is struck down and, people with pre-existing conditions can be discriminated against, that's a real issue. It's a real issue for people who even had COVID, because COVID is now going to be a pre-existing condition if the ACA is struck down. It's a real issue for women because, believe it or not, the way it's framed, women have a pre-existing condition of being women, right? That has implications for their health and how much they're charged, on everything from birth control to, everything else you could really imagine under the sun. It's sort of a double front on healthcare where we have to address COVID and this sort of urgent crisis, but also we have to expand coverage of people. It is far more expensive for taxpayers to be paying for people to go to emergency rooms than it is for us to have, sort of a minimum level of care for everyone, so that they, can get preventative health care that is far cheaper than that sort of urgent care that so many people go to because they don't have a choice, and especially in the context of COVID, we need to reassure people that, regardless of their ability to pay, they can be tested if they think they've been exposed, because you certainly don't want people going into work, possibly infected, just because they're too afraid that they wouldn't be able to afford the test. These are real issues.
Right. So, a couple of things. Just today, this morning, opening up the newspapers, looking at the cable television, Dr. Fauci, his people called idiots by Trump. There has been a tremendous effort to delegitimize and to take away the trustworthiness and belief in our scientific community. That's even seeping into various protests in Connecticut against mask wearing and people refusing to follow the rules, thinking that their freedoms are being interfered with if they do that. How would you address that kind of an issue? Because as the scientists tell us, it's not a political issue, it's science, and it's what we have to do for public health. Yeah. What is happening with the corruption of our scientific community by our leaders?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, again, we have things reflected in the state that we're seeing on the national level. This sort of anti-vaccine movement, this anti-mask movement, this sort of extremism and delegitimization of science. Anthony Fauci doesn't have any priority other than to make sure that we're doing the best we can and to mitigate the deaths from COVID. That's that simple, right? There's no secret agenda. But we see at the presidential level this sort of delegitimization of science and sort of this, my opinion is equal to an expert's, scientifically vetted journal paper conclusions. At the local level, I guess one aha moment, thinking back to your earlier question about when I decided to run, I was toying with the idea, and then I went to a forum that was held by my opponent, and it was supposed to be on small business, and it was taken over by people who were opposed to vaccines. And she sort of coddled them and said, well, I can see both sides of the issue. Well, not on public health, I don't. There's a very small sliver of the population that is immunocompromised that cannot have vaccines. But the vast majority of us take vaccines and took vaccines when we were in school to keep the population safe, right? That's how we eradicated things like polio in the US. So we really can't, sort of concede the point of, all opinions are valid. This isn't an issue of opinion, it's an issue of public health.
Right. Well, how will you, as a leader, as a leader, as a state representative representing thousands of people in your district. How will you use your position to make sure that public health is not politicized? And there isn't both sidisms. There's the side of public health. How do you propose our leaders in Connecticut do that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's difficult. People, now have partisan affiliation with whether or not they believe in science. I think one thing for sure is, there's a sizable segment of population that, gets their information from Facebook, and sort of these circles of community that are, don't have a vantage point on the outside where there might be other facts that they haven't seen, right? So I think, for a significant portion of the population, we can inform them. We can have experts come in and have panels and have it be public and sort of have transparency about, why are we saying that vaccines are effective? Why are we saying that masks work? These same people, oftentimes, I think if we sat them down and said to them, hey, if you went in for surgery on your knee, would you like your doctor to wear a mask? Why is that, right? I mean, it's stuff that we've known our whole life about basic safety precautions that people are now questioning. So, I think that you have to be unequivocal as a public official and avoid this whataboutism or both sidesism, and just really acknowledge the fact that these have real consequences, right? If I don't wear my mask, I might, potentially pass COVID to somebody and somebody down the line could die. I mean, that's Americans impacting the lives of other Americans. That's how it has to be framed, wearing a mask and adhering to social distancing, that's patriotic. That's what this is about, right? At the end of the day, we're all Americans living in America. So, let's sort of have that investment in each other's health.
Right. Well, that's the kind of exhortation, the kind of talking we need from our leaders, the kind of thing you just said. What do you want to do when you get to the legislature in terms of improving healthcare? I looked at some of your literature. You're talking about this public option. Explain how you think we can improve. And of course, in Connecticut, the Obamacare is codified. I mean, basically, if it's repealed, in Connecticut, we will have the protections that are in the law right now. The rest of the country will not. But what do you want to do to kind of improve it? What issues are you looking at?
Yeah. So two things. First of all, while Connecticut does sort of have a firewall, I think one thing that we're learning is that politics don't have the normal guardrails, right? So we have a firewall because we've had legislators that have been responsible and codified that in the law. But at some point, we might not have legislators that do that. So that's the first thing. As far as, healthcare expansion, there are some things that I think are really straightforward proposals that it'd be tough for anyone to push down, right? So Comptroller Lembo came out several months ago saying that he could provide a public option that people could buy into, right? Not blowing up the budget or anything. People could buy into it, and it'd be at 20% less cost than traditional private insurance plans. Now, I don't know anybody who wouldn't, want to save 20% of the cost they're paying towards insurance, right? That would have a real impact on our ability to sort of expand healthcare coverage and make sure that more of our community is covered. That's an easy first step, and that should be a bipartisan first step, right? As partisan as these times are, that should be something that's pretty straightforward. If you are a free market person and you should be able to acknowledge that if individuals have insurance, right, they have potability with their insurance, they can get it directly themselves. They have more economic opportunity, right? They can change jobs. If you're a small business owner and you're struggling with insurance, this would be a viable option too. This is something that the legislature has looked at opening up to small business. I know that growing up, I grew up in my father's small construction businesses. My father, one employee, my brother and I worked during the summers. And our deductible was $5,000 for health insurance. It was catastrophic insurance, which only helps you if you have something serious happen. Right. That's not reasonable, meaningful insurance, right? That's that's the worst of what could be offered. So we really have to have people covered in a way where they're going in and getting that preventative medicine that's so much cheaper than the urgent care.
Right. All right. Before we move on to another topic, is there anything else in the healthcare front that you want to add?
I just think, there's sort of been this attempt to make it seem radical that people should have access to healthcare. if you value American lives, especially in this pandemic, you should think that everybody has a right to healthcare, right? There are countries that are far less developed than this one that have universal healthcare. My family is from Spain. My father's originally from Spain. And I had to have unexpected surgery there once, and that was covered as a foreigner. These are things that countries far less wealthy than us, Americans, are able to afford and provide reasonably,
Yeah. What is it about America that has this bugaboo somehow that if you give everyone the right to universal health care in this country, somehow it's a mark of socialism? We have Medicare, which is for everyone 65 and over.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you're right. We're the only democracy that doesn't have, or not even just democracies, other countries that do not have universal health care. It's really stunning. And the Obamacare was a very tortured compromise because Obama and Vice President Biden just couldn't get the Republicans to go along with making a plan, and they just did the absolute best that they could to get something on the table, right? Basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we hope to move forward in that. All right, your next issue, you wanted to talk about economic opportunity. You started talking about fairness, and I'm assuming you mean kind of the gap. Here we are, one of the wealthiest states. I've heard you talk about that. And yet the gap between the wealthy and the poor is probably even more extreme in Connecticut than other states, perhaps. Talk about that.
Yeah, we're in the top three for wealthiest states and for greatest wealth disparity. And it's not just, it's important that we're talking both about wealth and salary. Those are big differences, right? Wealth is the accumulated amount of money that a family has, and salary is what they're getting each year through earned income. And in both those regards, we have a massive disparity, which means that our wealthiest are the wealthiest and our poorest are the poorest. A simple example, right? The minimum wage increase, the graduated minimum wage increase that was passed, started a $1 increase for minimum wage workers in September. What that means is people that are making about $23,000 before working full time will now make $25,000, right? That's $2,000 difference. That's a massive difference during a pandemic. Is it a livable wage? No, I don't think so, not yet. But that's the kind of legislation that really makes a difference, right? If you're a family of three, a husband and wife and a child, and one of the parents is working, that is a massive difference in the medication they're able to buy and how they're dealing with this pandemic. You look, I don't know what the specific numbers are off the top of my head in Connecticut, but I know nationwide, more than half of families could not afford a $500 unexpected bill, right? And this pandemic, a lot of people have gotten that $500 unexpected bill. So we really have to look at fairness. You can't have people taxed on prepared meals, right? A single family, a single parent family where the parent's trying to save some time and buy a prepared meal. You can't have them taxed on that and then have somebody who's making millions from passive income not be taxed on that. This is not socialism we're talking about. We're talking about common sense, right? You can't have these massive disparities, because what that means is, if we're talking about this in a real sense, the people who are really struggling, they're working poor, they have to use a social safety net. And who pays for that? All taxpayers. So there's a hidden fee, when you talk about, Walmart workers and how they're using a lot of the social safety net, we are subsidizing those big corporations, right? Because those people aren't making more per hour, right? They're not making a livable wage. So we have to look at this holistically, and we have to reframe the argument, because this is not about taking money from hardworking Americans who are multi-millionaires. It's about a little bit of fairness, a little bit of opportunity for people who are genuinely struggling despite their best efforts to get ahead. And might I just note in passing, because I don't know if it'll come up again, regarding minimum wage, legislators make $28,000 a year for a job where they're in session on average 5 months out of the year, right? My opponent voted against the minimum wage increase. And she makes substantially more than somebody working full time under minimum wage. That is not justifiable economically or ethically, in my opinion.
Are you publicizing the information that your opponent voted against the minimum wage in Connecticut? This is part of your campaign literature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it most certainly is. I mean, every race is between two candidates' policies, or at least I'd like to think so. I'd like to think it's less about personalities and more about policies, because I don't have an issue with my opponent in terms of who she is. I have a very profound issue with a lot of the policy positions that she's taken. So I've highlighted that, on minimum wage, she voted against that. On paid family medical leave, she voted against that. Might I note that legislators are allowed to take leave from their other jobs without penalty if they need to do some things for the legislature, right? So they have a sort of their own leave, but she voted against the paid family medical leave for others who need it for medical purposes. There's a lot of issues like this. You can't ask people to reelect you and then vote against several laws that would increase voter access to the polls, that would increase the efficiency of how ballots are counted, and would keep our elections safe. There's just a whole host of issues that I'm highlighting. If this is a debate about policy, I think people will see a clear contrast between the opponent and myself.
All right, and I hope you will continue to make those contrasts in a very big way as we go through this campaign. So yes, voting against some of the voting bills, the access to voting against the minimum wage, voting against paid family and medical leave in Connecticut, which passed. Let's see, voting against release of police camera videos, right? Something that you would not have voted against. Is that right? Yeah,
that's true. So, it's interesting that it's another issue that's been politicized just ridiculously. I have family in law enforcement. Law enforcement have a right to be safe, but they also have to be accountable. They are the only segment of our population that is allowed to use lethal force, right, other than our military. And they can use it against civilians in our own homeland. So, while we're having this conversation about, sort of law enforcement, we need to have a genuine conversation about sort of the scope of the powers that they have. These bills that were proposed in the state are not radical, right? You look at them, release of police body camera footage, we paid for those cameras, right? We paid for the storage device for that camera footage. Why do we as citizens not have access to it? Well, our legislature voted in favor and my opponent voted against that. I don't know of a lot of other things that taxpayers pay for that they're not entitled to. We are certainly entitled to that. And just as a practical matter, right? In cases where there's a question about the behavior of law enforcement, the behavior of alleged perpetrators, it provides you clear video footage, right? So if the officer is behaving in an accountable way, they can be exculpated with that kind of video. Yeah. Another thing that was major to these police accountability bills is duty to intervene. Well, what does that mean? A duty to intervene means if you have a colleague who's doing something criminal, you, as a fellow officer, step up and say, no, stop doing that. Any of us citizens should do that, right? When we see something wrong, we should call the police, or we should step in and say, hey, buddy, you can't do that, right? Police officers have to be held to a higher standard. There's been a lot made about, the ability of people to sue, people who are doing wrongdoing in the role of law enforcement. When I was a teacher, we could be sued if we didn't adhere to people's rights, right? Their equal protections under law in terms of their access to education. That's not new for public employees to be held accountable in that way. So there are definitely issues in any bill that could be improved, and I don't think this one's an exception, but I am for sure in favor of police accountability. Without accountable police, there's no faith in law enforcement, and that's not good for anybody.
Well, you said you've got law enforcement people in your family, and I think your view is a thoughtful, enlightened thinking about it, instead of almost, I think, a knee-jerk thing, a black and white. So your opponent, well, she's for the police, so she's not going to vote against any legislation that will hold them accountable. I mean, that may not be true, but I think I see that. I see, the camps, and then there's the people who believe that everything the police does is in the nature of police brutality, which isn't true, because as you said, there are rules about the kind of lethal force that can be used under certain circumstances. The issue is, what is the circumstance and whether it was a legitimate use of that lethal power, and that's what a lot of these cases stand for. But I think your view of looking at it logically, from the point of view of accountability, is so much better than that kind of knee-jerk, well, I'm for the police and that's it. And you're against the police. You're not against the police, Judd. Say that again. You're not against the police. They're a very, very important institution in our society, but they need accountability like everyone else.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not against the police. It's, having been a public servant in the capacity of being a teacher, I'm always drawn to the same parallel, right? If there's some serious wrongdoing by a teacher, right, and there have been headlines that have been made, I would never run to that teacher's defense and say, hey, you can't critique them because most people in that profession are honorable. That's not the question here. The question is, are people being held accountable, right? When there is wrongdoing, that's the real issue. And it's not casting aspersions on anybody who chose that profession. There are, and it's not a clear issue either. Minorities serve a lot in law enforcement. It's not, from a racial justice standpoint, there are people on both sides of the law enforcement system. It's far too easy to make a caricature of opponents, right? And this is an issue where it really does matter that we speak clearly and that people actually know what's in the bill, because what was in the bill that was passed is profoundly different from the people who are here protesting about it. In most cases, they think there's stuff in there that just is not in the bill.
Exactly, because they're already in a certain camp. It's sort of like the mask versus the maskless camp, which is crazy. It's all politicized improperly. Let's get on to the next. The third issue for you is improving how government institutions serve us. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, so viewers didn't get to appreciate my faulty internet here. I'm in rural Connecticut, and I chose rural Connecticut with my family because we love it. But there are services that can be provided better. Our utilities, including our internet, are not great, right? Reliability is terrible, and we are living on the internet these days, right? In terms of all the activities we're doing on Zoom, I'm doing this interview over the internet. It's important that we have reliable access. We have to look at it as a public good, not a luxury to have internet anymore. That means education access for lots of students who are working from home. These are basic things, right? I'm very proud that Norm Needleman pushed through that bill on utility improvements, right? The accountability, the staffing numbers that are going to have to be upheld, the compensation for people who have spoiled food or medicine. These are the types of things we need to be looking at, is what services are being provided. Some will be by the government, some will be by third parties, that need to be done better and more reliably, right? We all have felt those moments of panic during this pandemic where we thought, are we going to be able to get this item or that item? We have seen like never before, at least not for the past 100 years, sort of how precarious our safety can feel, right? And the safety of our families, more importantly, perhaps. We really have to make sure that our schools are up to the task. In terms of our state has been trying a lot to connect people with services that they need, but there's always streamlining that can be done in government in terms of making it easier for people to access the services that they need and not having to run through a lot of red tape. I don't think that should be controversial, right? There's a whole lot of issues like this. And I think more will emerge as the pandemic drags on, unfortunately.
Okay. So getting back to economic opportunity, of course, it's all tied into how we budget, because in our budget, we set our priorities and our policies. So I want you to talk about making sure we have to keep within our budget, but provide education and economic development that matches our education. Talk about that. What is your policy on economic development?
Yeah, so funny enough, I'm on economic development here in East Haddam on the local level. We all, as families, have to live within our means, and I get that. In terms of a state, if we are looking at the whole United States, we're in the top 3 best in terms of budgets, right? As much complaining is done, as much concern that people have. The rainy day fund that was created years ago has been hugely helpful, right? And will deal a lot with the deficits that we're facing. So much so successful was it, for people that don't know, above 15%, money gets kicked into paying down debt in the state. The government just put $60 million towards unfunded liability and pensions, right? One of the tiers of pensions is not sufficiently funded because of decades of not properly funding it. So some of these issues are chronic issues that we can address. I think pensions is a good example of something where we can chip away at by putting money in at it over time, and fulfilling our obligation to people who worked their whole life in some careers, and still find the money to do the stuff that we need to do. Candidly, it really is not just a local election. We have to look at the big picture. The federal government has dropped the ball on this on every level, right? In normal circumstances, with a normal functioning federal government, the feds would have kicked in more money to the states. And we have a president right now who said, well, let the states go bankrupt. I mean, that's a direct quote. So a lot will hinge on this next presidential election in terms of the federal funding that we're provided. The payment protection that we've gotten thus far is good. It's a good start, but it certainly doesn't make people whole. There's a lot of other issues that are going to be emerging as time goes on. And realistically, we don't have the final numbers right now for the economic impact of COVID. We don't. But as a state, we're positioned better than most states with the massive rainy day fund that we're going to definitely be biting into to address sort of, some of these budget shortfalls. But I think something important to reiterate from an economic and from a healthcare standpoint is, if we are responsible citizens, if we wear our masks, if we socially distance, if we do all the things we're supposed to do, we'll prevent our economy from shutting down again. And that is good for everyone. So this is not a time to get complacent. Let's put our economy back on track and make sure that we can, open businesses as much as we can safely and make sure that people are getting the paychecks that they deserve.
Yeah, just wanted to remind you and everyone that as we speak today, the rate of hospitalizations and cases in most of the states in this country, almost 40 of them, are going up and up and up. And at this moment, there's no end in sight. And we have such a patchwork of various governors politicizing, not politicizing. I mean, it's no firm, national, coherent plan to deal with this issue. Right, Judd?
Yeah.
So whether or not we're going to have to take other more stringent measures of closing down certain things again, we don't know. But all we know is that it is a hot button political issue, and it should be a public health issue, right?
Yeah. I mean, these aren't numbers. These aren't abstractions. We're looking at estimates of, 400,000 Americans dead by January, right? Those are some realistic projections. That's terrifying. Those are not flu season numbers, as some people have suggested. Those are much more concerning than that. There's a real face to this, and I feel for everyone, for sure. I particularly feel for frontline workers who are exposed to extra risk through the irresponsible behavior of some people who think, well, I don't need to wear a mask. It's my life. I'll risk it. No, it's not. It's everybody, and in particular the most sensitive populations. You think of somebody who's gone to work, for years in healthcare and went, to years of education before that to get to that position. You're risking their life, when you go out and you're irresponsible. So, we need to think of that. We need to frame it in those human terms, not in abstractions of numbers.
Right. And now I also know that you are critical for the way that education is delivered in Connecticut in terms of the cost sharing and the fact that certain more economically benefited communities have more money for more supplies and more salaries and so forth. Talk about your feelings about how we deliver education more fairly in Connecticut.
Yeah. So, ostensibly the state has had, cost sharing formula for years, but it has only been fully funded in, I think, a couple of those years, in the couple of decades that it's been around. That's really alarming, right? There are real just, things that we have to overcome, right? Those are disadvantages that kids are born into oftentimes. That we need to address through funding in schools and through attracting teachers that are going to stay in it. Nationally, I know that the rate of teachers giving up the profession is it's about half of teachers, I believe, give up the profession within 5 years, right? We need qualified, skilled teachers in the classroom teaching our kids. We need kids that have genuine resources and they're not using 20-year-old textbooks. I'm appreciative of the big push that the state did in terms of, giving access to lots of computers for kids to use at home. But we need to look at education from a different standpoint now, right? We have to think about internet access as an equity issue. That there's a lot of maligning of the pension plans of teachers. I say this to people all the time, and it blows their mind. Teachers who have worked as teachers are not eligible for Social Security, right?
In Connecticut, that's true, right?
Yeah, that is their retirement. So the benefits that they get is your equivalent of Social Security for most of you out there. These are real things we need to think about, and who are we attracting, and who's going to stay in the profession, and are we doing all we can to get kids where they need to be, and are we teaching them the skills they need to? Another thing that I think is important is trades workers. That's an important skill set. I worked in construction, in the family business, and some kids don't like quote unquote traditional school courses, but they really take to hands-on learning. These are all things that we need to be looking at in terms of training people for the careers of tomorrow and making sure that everybody has access to education. I think one great thing that the state did was the free tuition to community colleges that they did a pilot program on. I think that is a great opportunity in terms of, we're looking at an economy where things are a little bit more fluid than we like, and people are having to retrain and go back to school in many cases, or sometimes having to delay their education because of cost prohibitive, because it's cost prohibitive. We have to look holistically at education. I've worked in education for a decade, and you have to take it all stakeholders in and discuss sort of these intersectional issues that we need to confront.
So another issue that tends to have become politicized in these last years is the issue of climate change, which again is another sad commentary on how the politicians grab a hold of it and the scientists are disregarded. One of the things that your opponent voted against that you were complaining about is that climate, along with some other subjects, be part of the education curriculum. Talk about that. Why is that such an important topic for our kids to learn about?
Yeah, and for people less familiar with the bill, it is climate change, but also, it had Puerto Rican studies in there. We have a very significant portion of the population in Connecticut is Puerto Rican, one of the largest populations outside of Puerto Rico. I don't think that there's anything bad about learning about our cultural diversity. That is our strength as a nation. That's our strength as a state. So that's, one thing. In terms of climate change, it is, I'm left speechless sometimes on this issue. It is so straightforward. There is such a consensus within the scientific community that climate change is real, right? That it's largely anthropogenic, meaning it's human produced for the most part. There are other contributing factors, and that it will have a real effect on everything, not just coral reefs out in the middle of the ocean, but on us, right? We've seen in our lifetimes more extreme storms. Now, people can pass it off as anecdotal, but if you look at the big picture, they're not. We really are going to face an economic consequence for this. And it just shouldn't be politicized. We can have a debate about how much money people want to put into renewable energies. I'm happy with that debate. I pay way too much for my energy. I would rather be paying for renewables and put some solar panels on my roof and make that easier in this state. We've lost power a bunch of times. That would be nice. But you have to acknowledge that there is a real science behind climate change and the things that we're confronting. And, to just say, well, I'm not a scientist. Well, then if you are not qualified to listen to experts, then you shouldn't be there listening to anybody, is my view. So we really have to just re-legitimize science. Climate change is a no-brainer.
Right. Well, yeah. So you've described some of your views and the kind of policies that you would be working toward. But of course, when you're a state representative, you represent the people in your district, and I'm sure you've got to listen to them and their concerns. So I'm sure you've gone around and in your campaigning. Tell us, what are the people of your district telling you? What do they want, and how are you going to fulfill their needs when you get to the State House?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, the vast majority of the conversations I've had have been about healthcare, right? And it's not me bringing it up, it's voters bringing it up. They're worried about, COVID. They're worried about our economy. And those are, issues that are deeply intertwined. I think that's been the bulk of the conversation I've had. I've had some really interesting conversations with other people. There's a gentleman that I spoke to who's in his 90s. He's been retired for 30 years, and he was talking about his disability benefits and his retirement benefits being taxed, and how, he continues to be taxed on these things, but they haven't increased with time. We need to think about, sort of sustainability in terms of seniors being able to stay in the communities that they love, and how do we do that? And how do we keep housing affordable for them? That's something that people have been raising a lot. In terms of, I was speaking to a medical assistant, a home health aide, who was saying, they're not reimbursed for mileage. And in this pandemic, they don't make huge margins. They make much less than most people would realize. Having a more livable wage and basic compensation for things that they have to pay for out of pocket. Those are the conversations I've been having with a lot of people. It's very humbling to talk to people and sort of hear their situation, sort of the struggle that they're going through, and their eagerness for somebody who will give a voice to that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to kind of summarize, give you an opportunity to tell us if there's any other issues that we haven't touched upon that you want to talk about, but also why, Judd, should the voters in the 34th district vote for you and not your opponent? What are they getting with Judd Melon?
Yeah. So, one of the things I pride myself on is we've run a policy-based campaign. And because, it's an incumbent who has a record of 2 years, I can really draw a contrast with what she has emphasized, voted against, or voted for, and what I would have supported. In 2 years' time, her biggest legislative accomplishment is what's known as the balloon bill, that you can't release 10 or more balloons in a 24-hour period. I agree, people should not be releasing balloons into the atmosphere. But as we can see right now, these are serious times, and they require serious legislation and a serious thoughtfulness to what we're doing. Government is not the answer to everything, but there are some answers that can only be found in government. A pandemic is one of those situations, right, where we need strong public health policy. In Hartford, I'd be a voice for science. I'd be a voice for working people, for pay equity, definitely for social justice, which is something we haven't spoken about enough, but there's a lot of intersections of just ways that people are impacted in their daily lives. People are just asking for fairness. That's really what it is. And if you see my yard signs anywhere, they're an equal sign. My name is pretty small, but the logo is pretty big. It's just a big equal sign. And that's what we're all about. It's about fairness and giving people a fair shot. And that's really all I'm advocating for. I would ask you compare my opponent's record with the issues that I've supported. And I'd like to restore relevance to the district as well, because honestly, we've been a no vote on so many bills. She hasn't pushed for amendments. She hasn't pushed for improvements, and all bills can be improved. That's something that anybody should be doing, even if they're in the minority party. And that, I don't have a problem critiquing my party when I think they're doing things wrong, and praising it when they're doing things right. And I will be a voice, for people that want accountable government in every sense. Okay,
great. So this has been really great talking to you, Judd, and hearing about your campaign and your experiences and why you want to be the next state representative from the 34th. So good luck on the campaign trail the next couple of weeks, and I hope to have you back for a discussion when you are the state representative, before or after you get sworn in, okay?
Thank you so much. And a reminder to everybody to vote by November 3rd. It's important.
Absolutely. Vote. If you're voting absentee, do it right now. Go down to your town hall and vote right now. You can actually do that too. You can vote on election day. It will be safe. There will be precautions for everybody, but do it as soon as you can and as early as you can to make your plan for how you're going to vote. I think we'll get a big turnout. I'm hopeful. Are you?
I'm hopeful. That's our first right?
Absolutely. And let's keep that fair and equal for everyone too. Thanks a lot, Judd. Been great talking to you, and we'll see you next time tomorrow on Talkback. Congressman Joe Courtney at 1:00 on Facebook Live, Channel 14 Norwich. See you then. Bye, Judd. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.